I was 37 years old the morning I opened a certified letter from a law firm I had never hired, informing me that a power of attorney executed in my name had been used to freeze disbursements from a $520,000 trust my grandmother left me. The signature on that power of attorney was mine. I did not sign it. Welcome back to Family Revenge Stories New, the channel where quiet people keep the receipts and family learns that boundaries have a price. If stories about dignity, documents, and consequences are your thing, drop a comment and subscribe. And stay with me on this one because the irony of what my parents forgot about my job took a while to land, even for me. I am a forensic accountant. I have spent 15 years finding the lie inside the number. I have sat in depositions and watched people sweat through linen blazers while I explained, quietly, to a jury, exactly where their money went and when and how they tried to hide it. I don't look for guilt. I look for gaps, the 4-day window between the wire transfer and the amended ledger, the signature dated on a Sunday when the notary's log shows no Sunday clients, the account number that appears in 2 documents and matches in neither. The gap is always there. I simply know where to look. My grandmother, Marguerite, knew what I did. She used to say I had my grandfather's eyes, that I looked at people the way a doctor reads a chart, looking for what's wrong rather than assuming what's right. She didn't mean it unkindly. She meant I was careful. She was right. She left me everything she could leave me without it touching my parents. I understood this about 12 seconds after her estate attorney finished reading the document. I need to tell you about my parents. My father is the kind of man who has always been the smartest person in a room, provided he chooses the room carefully. My mother is the kind of woman who translates his ambitions into social reality. She handles the relationships, the appearances, the version of the family that gets presented at church and at dinners and at the kinds of gatherings where crystal is polished before guests arrive. Together they have always operated on a single shared assumption, that the family's money was, in some essential way, their money. That the flow of it, from grandmother to children to grandchildren, was a river they stood at the head of and therefore managed. I was the youngest. I was also the one who, from the age of about 14, noticed things. The way a check made out to household expenses coincided with my father's car upgrade. The way my grandmother's medical bills were paid out of a joint account she shared with my mother for convenience. The way the word family expanded or contracted depending on who was being asked to contribute versus who was receiving. I stopped mentioning what I noticed when I was 19. It made holidays quieter. It made me easier to be around. And it meant that for 18 years, my parents operated under the assumption that I had grown out of whatever suspicious phase I had been in as a teenager. They forgot I had made a career of it. My grandmother died on a Tuesday in March. She was 81. She had been ill for a year and she had handled the illness the way she handled everything. Efficiently, without complaint, and with paperwork. She had updated her estate documents 8 months before her death. She had a new will. She had a revocable living trust. She had an advance healthcare directive, a HIPAA authorization, and a pour-over will that would have made most estate planning attorneys emotional. She had also written me a letter. I did not know about the letter until later. The trust was straightforward. It named me as the sole beneficiary of $520,000, the product of a life lived carefully and a house sold in a market she had the patience to wait for. It had a corporate trustee, a bank, not a family member, because my grandmother had spent 81 years watching what happened when you let family members near accounts. There was a distribution schedule. At 6 months post-death, 50%. At 12 months, the remainder, after accounting for administrative costs. My parents were named in the will. They received the furniture, the jewelry that wasn't already in the trust, and a cash bequest of $15,000 each. This was not nothing. This was also, clearly, not what they expected. I know what they expected because my mother told me, over the phone 3 days after the funeral, in a voice that had not yet recalibrated to the new reality. She said, "Your grandmother loved everyone equally. I just want to make sure the distribution reflects that." I said, "I understand." I put the phone down and opened a new document on my desktop. I titled it. I dated it. I recorded the time of the call, 2:14 p.m. I typed her words verbatim. That is not a thing I had to think about doing. It is simply what I do. The certified letter arrived 11 weeks after the funeral. I sat at my kitchen table and I read it 3 times. The letterhead was from a firm in my parents' city. The letter informed me that, pursuant to a durable power of attorney signed by me on April 14th, 2 weeks before my grandmother's death, the agent named in that document had contacted the corporate trustee and requested that distributions be held pending a review of trust validity. April 14th. I had been in Denver on April 14th. I had the hotel receipt, the conference badge, the dinner receipt from a steakhouse on 16th Street Mall where I had eaten alone because I had a 7 a.m. panel the next morning. I had the Delta confirmation with a seat assignment and a boarding pass in my email. I had not been in my parents' city on April 14th. I had not signed anything on April 14th. My name was on the document. My social security number was on the document. The notarization was from a notary whose stamp I did not recognize. I did not call my parents. I called my attorney. Then I called the corporate trustee directly and told them in plain language that I had not executed a power of attorney on April 14th or any other date, that I was a forensic accountant with 15 years of fraud investigation experience, and that I would like a complete copy of the document they had received, including the notary information, faxed to me within the hour. They faxed it in 40 minutes. I laid it flat on my kitchen table and I looked at it the way I look at everything. The signature was close. It was very close. Someone had practiced. But the date stamp on the notarization had a font irregularity I had seen once before, in a case involving a forged mortgage release in Maricopa County. The kerning between the 1 and the 4 in the date was inconsistent with a standard notary stamp impression. Stamps produce uniform pressure. This one had not. I photographed the document. I photographed it from 6 angles. I uploaded it to a secure folder. I labeled the folder. Then I made a list. I do not need to describe what I felt sitting there. I will tell you that I made the list in order, starting with the most time-sensitive items, and that I did not eat dinner that night. I will tell you that at 11:47 p.m. I was still at the table, and that at some point I picked up the phone and held it without dialing and then put it back down. The thing I kept returning to was April 14th, Denver. The conference. My panel had been about document authentication in estate fraud cases. The irony was the kind that doesn't make you laugh. If you have ever watched people who were too busy to call on your grandmother's birthday suddenly find all the time in the world when the estate paperwork gets filed, you already know where this goes. Stay with me. My attorney filed a formal objection to the power of attorney with the corporate trustee within 48 hours. The trustee, to their credit, placed the distribution hold in a neutral status, neither releasing nor withholding, pending legal clarification. That bought time. It also apparently set off an alarm. My father called me on a Thursday morning. He did not open with hello. He opened with, "I heard there was some confusion with the trust." Confusion. That was the word he chose. I said, "What kind of confusion?" He said, "Something about a power of attorney. Your mother, and I just wanted to make sure you were protected while things got sorted out." I wrote that down. I wrote down the time. 9:22 a.m. I wrote down protected. I underlined it. I said, "Who told you about the power of attorney?" There was a pause that lasted 4 seconds. I counted. He said, "It came up through the attorney's office." I said, "Which attorney's office?" He said, "I don't want this to turn into a thing, sweetheart. Family money should stay in the family and be handled by family." I said, "I agree completely. Can you tell me the name of the notary on the document?" He said he'd have to check. He never called back with the name. 2 weeks later, my brother Marcus, who had not attended our grandmother's funeral because he'd had plans, and who had not called me once in the 11 weeks since her death, showed up at my apartment. He didn't text first. He rang the buzzer. He was holding a bottle of wine and wearing the expression he wears when he wants something that he knows he has to perform warmth in order to receive. He sat down. He poured 2 glasses. He told me about his business, the one that had needed 3 separate infusions from our parents over the past 4 years. He talked for 19 minutes before he said anything relevant. I know it was 19 minutes because I have a clock on the wall behind the couch where he was sitting and I watched it. He said, Look, Gran always wanted the family to be taken care of. All of us. I just think there was probably some confusion about what she intended. I said. Do you? He said. $500,000 is a lot for one person. It could do a lot for a lot of people. I said. Tell me about the power of attorney, Marcus. He looked at the wine glass. He looked at the clock behind me, which I thought was interesting, and then he looked at me. He said, I don't know what you're talking about. He left the wine. He didn't finish his glass. I called my attorney that night and said, send the letters. The letters went to my parents, to Marcus as a potentially interested party, and to the notary whose stamp appeared on the forged document. The letter to the notary was the most important one. It informed her that her commission number and stamp appeared on a document that the purported signatory had not executed, and that we would be requesting her log for the date in question, and that if the log did not reflect a notarization of that document on that date, the matter would be referred to the State Attorney General's office and the State Notary Commission. She called my attorney's office within 6 hours. She said she had been approached by a woman, she described my mother, who had told her the document was a routine family matter. She said she had notarized blank pages, which she understood would be filled in with details the family had already agreed on. She said she hadn't thought anything of it because it had seemed like estate paperwork and family things were complicated, and she hadn't wanted to ask too many questions. Notarizing blank pages is not a minor procedural error. It is not a technicality. It is the thing that makes everything else possible. It is the foundation of the structure my parents had tried to build. My attorney recorded the statement. The notary provided a written declaration. Now we had an affidavit, a forged document, a notary willing to testify, hotel records establishing I was in Denver, a conference badge, a boarding pass, 2 dinner receipts, and a file of phone calls recorded in my own notes with timestamps. And then there was my grandmother's letter. I learned about the letter from the estate attorney, who had been holding it per my grandmother's instructions, to be delivered after the first distribution was attempted. She had written it in January. She had dated it herself in her own hand in the margin, January 9th. She wrote, if you are reading this after some difficulty, then I was not wrong to worry. I am leaving this letter because I know the people in your life well enough to know they will tell you what I wanted. They have always been better at telling people what I wanted than I was. So I am writing it down. I want you to have what I earned, not a portion of it discussed at a table I am no longer sitting at. All of it. And I want you to know that I saw what they did not give you credit for. I always saw. The last line was the one I could not read quickly. She wrote, quiet is not the same as undefended. I read the letter 4 times. I folded it on its original creases. I put it in the folder labeled April 14th. My mother called me the following Saturday morning and told me there was a family dinner she hoped I would attend. Her voice was the particular temperature it gets when she is performing a kindness that is actually a demand. She said everyone would be there. She said it would be good for everyone to talk in person. I said I would come. I brought a folder. The dinner was at my parents' house. There were 8 people at the table, including Marcus and his wife, my aunt who has never in my memory disagreed with my mother about anything, a family friend who had served as my father's financial advisor for 30 years in the way that people call things by professional names when the reality is less credentialed, and my parents. There was a roast. There was wine. There was the specific warmth of a table set by someone who wants the setting to do emotional work in advance of a conversation. My father stood up before the salad course and gave a toast. He said that family was the thing that mattered. He said that money was just a tool. He said that my grandmother would have wanted everyone taken care of, all of them together, and that he hoped we could come to an understanding as a family that honored her wishes. He sat down. Everyone looked at me. My mother said gently, we thought since we're all here we might talk about what makes sense going forward. With the trust. I said, I'd actually like to share a few things if that's okay. My mother smiled. Of course. I opened the folder. I said, this is the power of attorney that was submitted to the corporate trustee on April 22nd. I placed it on the table in front of me. This document claims I signed it on April 14th. I placed the hotel receipt next to it. This is my hotel receipt from Denver on April 13th and 14th. I placed the boarding pass next to that. This is my boarding pass for the return flight on April 15th. No one said anything. I said, "This is the affidavit from the notary whose stamp appears on the document." I placed it on the table. She has provided a written statement that she was asked to notarize blank pages by a woman she describes here. I turned the page and read from it. As the mother of the trust beneficiary. My mother said, "That's not." I said, "I'm not finished." The room was quiet. I placed a printout of the trust document. I explained the distribution schedule. I explained what sole beneficiary means in plain language, for the benefit of anyone at the table who might be uncertain. I explained what a fraudulent power of attorney is legally and criminally. I explained the difference between a civil matter and a criminal referral. Marcus said, "This is getting out of hand." I said, "The Notary Commission has already received our complaint. The State Attorney General's office has received a copy of the affidavit. The corporate trustee has received a certified letter rescinding any authorization from the forged document and requesting immediate reinstatement of the distribution schedule." My father said, and his voice had changed, "You didn't need to do all of that. We were just trying to protect you." I looked at him. I said, "From what?" He didn't answer. My aunt said, "She would have wanted." I said, "My grandmother left a letter." I took it from the folder. I read one line. She wrote, "Quiet is not the same as undefended." I put the letter back. My mother started to cry. The tears were real. That was the thing about my mother. The emotion was always genuine. She genuinely believed that what was good for her was good for the family. She genuinely felt that her management of the family's resources was a form of care. She had spent 60 years convinced that wanting a thing and deserving a thing were the same event. I did not say any of that. My father's financial advisor, the man who had been called a financial advisor for 30 years, leaned forward and said quietly, "I told them not to do it." I looked at him. He said, "For what it's worth. I told them this was wrong." I said, "I know." He looked surprised. He shouldn't have been. It was in his body language the moment I opened the folder. I had watched him. I watch everyone. I closed the folder. I stood up. I said, "I'm not going to pursue criminal charges." The room exhaled. I said, "Provided the Notary Commission finds no prior incidents and the document is formally withdrawn by the end of this week." I picked up the folder. I said, "I hope the roast is good. I won't be staying." I drove home in the dark. I put the folder on my kitchen table in the same spot where I had first laid out the forged document 6 weeks earlier. I made tea. I sat down. I thought about what my grandmother had said. About quiet. About defense. If this reminded you that knowing things is not the same as using them, and that the decision about when to use them is the only power anyone can actually take from you, take that as your sign. Update what needs updating. Tell the person in your life who has been staying quiet that quiet has a strategy and the strategy holds. Drop a comment below, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. The distribution was released in full 14 days later. $520,000, minus administrative costs, arriving in 2 wire transfers that I confirmed, to the dollar against the trust accounting. The Notary Commission found no prior incidents. She surrendered her commission voluntarily. She will not notarize documents again. My parents did not call for 3 months. When my mother finally called, she said she missed me. I believe she did. We speak occasionally now, holidays, birthdays, in the measured way of people who have had the accounting made explicit and have decided the relationship is worth a modified version of itself. Marcus lost the business 8 months later. I did not learn this from him. I learned it from a mutual acquaintance, delivered as information rather than news. He is working for someone else now. We have not spoken. My father's financial advisor sent me a card. It said only, "She would have been proud." I put it in the same folder. My grandmother's letter lives in a frame on my office wall. Not the full letter. Just the last line. I had a local print shop set it in letterpress on cream stock, in a font that is plain and clean and does not try to be beautiful because it doesn't have to. Quiet is not the same as undefended. With the first distribution, I funded 2 years of accounting scholarships at the community college in my grandmother's town. The scholarship is named for her. It is awarded each spring to a student who demonstrates, in the words of the application committee, precision, patience, and the willingness to stay at the table until the numbers tell the truth. She would have said that was too much fuss. She would have been pleased anyway. The thing about fraud, real fraud, not the movie version, is that it depends on the target's desire to believe the best. My parents bet on my love for them. They bet that I would see the document and assume there was an explanation. They bet that I was, underneath the credentials and the career, still the youngest child who wanted to keep the peace. They forgot that I stopped keeping the peace the day I learned to read a balance sheet. They forgot that I have spent 15 years in rooms where people swore their signatures were forged and then watched me prove otherwise. They forgot that I do not assume. I verify.